In what is set to be her first big policy speech, Vice President Kamala Harris is expected to talk about the need to take on higher prices at the grocery store. So now on Friday, she will be in North Carolina to give a speech where she's expected to push for a federal ban on price gouging when it comes to groceries. According to previews of her speech, Harris is putting in particular emphasis on the rising prices of meat. All right, cool.
I like my meat tight.
Especially when it doesn't make my wallet tight, okay? So, hey, great. Here we go. We're getting an economic plan. Now, she will also apparently talk about drug and home prices as well. Great. So what do we know so far? Well, apparently Harris plans to direct the FTC under Lina Khan and other agencies to investigate and penalize big corporations that violate rules. Okay, rules against, again, price gouging. She also plans to direct her administration to carefully scrutinize proposed mergers between large food companies with an emphasis on considering whether they will result in higher grocery prices for consumers. So now there is one proposed merger. M&M and Mars is looking to buy Kellanova. Kellanova owns Eggo Townhouse, Morningstar Farms, and Rice Krispies, among many others, right? So now this would be a huge merger, okay, worth billions of dollars. That would be disastrous for consumers. Lina Khan over the FTC has been actually really good on antitrust, breaking up big companies, suing them. There are several lawsuits. The DOJ just won one against Google, but then the FTC has also filed suits against Amazon and Meta over antitrust. So they're looking at either stopping these mergers or breaking up these big companies, which of course is pissing off big donors, like, for example, LinkedIn founder Reid Hoffman, who pressured Harris to fire Khan if she wins. Now, with this speech, it kind of looks like she's planning on keeping Khan in her position, which would be a great thing because these mergers, like I said, they hurt everyone except for the shareholders at these giant companies. All right, they hurt workers as well. They hurt workers, they hurt union contracts, and of course they hurt the consumer. So now, of course, a lot of the critics on the right are already panning the speech as communism. Yes, it's communism. It's not price gouging. No, the real problem with inflation is Bidenomics. All those stimulus checks from the pandemic. Oh, really? No, turns out a recent report compiled by the Progressive Groundwork Collaborative think tank found that corporate profits actually accounted for 53% of inflation during last year's second and third quarters. Profits actually drove just 11% of price growth in the 40 years prior to the pandemic. So these companies took the pandemic, and yes, there was a lot of government spending. The majority of that actually did go to corporations as well. And they took that as an excuse to then just hike their prices sky high and never bring them back down. Prices for consumers rose by 3.4% over the past year, but input costs for producers increased by just 1%. And that's after going way back down at the end of the pandemic. According to the author's calculations, which were based on data from the Bureau of Economic Analysis and National Income and Products Accounts, costs, according to Liz Pencotti, have come down substantially. And while corporations were quick to pass on their increased costs to consumers, they're surprisingly less quick to pass on their savings to consumers. In fact, look, one of the more recent companies to start scaling back their prices, Subway. They're like, maybe we ought to bring our prices back down a little bit. Turns out, remember $5 footlongs? Yeah, they ain't $5 no more, okay? Maybe we ought to bring that back, There are other restaurants that have also discussed bringing down their prices a bit because people aren't eating out as much because they can't afford it. These prices are so sky high. And yet, I love how they blame this on the stimulus checks, right? Oh, you got $1,200, and therefore that is supposed to last 4 years of massively increased prices. What? What? Ridiculous. Now, the report's authors also found numerous examples of executives bragging to their shareholders about keeping prices high and widening profit margins as their input costs come down. So, again, as a result of the pandemic, look, you did have costs that went up. You had supply chain issues. We all remember that. You also have the war in Ukraine that affected grain, that also affected, fuel prices and things like that. Now, the supply chain issues are, for the most part, solved. Have been solved for a while. The war in Ukraine, ongoing. However, to compensate for the increased energy costs, the U.S. has massively ramped up oil drilling, oil production. We're actually one of the biggest, if not the biggest producer in the world of energy right now. And that's to compensate for the dearth of Russian oil. Okay? So now, Isabella Weber, a University of Massachusetts Amherst economist, says that despite the massive drop in the energy costs, now again, this goes in direct contrast to what Donald Trump's saying is, we need to, in order to fix our economy, we need to drill, baby, drill. We can bring down the price of energy. Well, it's not the price of energy that's too high. It's the profiteers, you see, that are making, these prices much, much higher. There are corporate profiteers that are, and a lot of this has to do with the futures and securities markets and, people betting that, it's going to be more expensive. And then, of course, when they say, when they all think, well, it's going to be more expensive next year, so we're just going to bet that it's going to be higher. Well, what does that do to the price? It makes it higher. So it's all ridiculous. It's all weird. And that's the only way to describe it. Now, here's what she says. That despite the massive drop in energy costs, corporations are still maintaining high prices due to implicit collusion. Now, she said, firms do not even need to talk to one another to know that a cost shock is a great time to raise prices. But when costs fall, price-setting firms do not have any incentive to decrease prices. If no firms launch a price war, then companies hold the line on prices and widen their margins. And that's what's going on right here. One example, by the way, is diapers, right? Prices went up 30% during the pandemic as a result of an increase in wood pulp demand, in prices, right, for wood pulp. And I remember, just wood in general being a lot more expensive during the pandemic. Now, the cost for wood pulp has decreased since, but the prices are unchanged, still high, because the companies are pocketing the difference in increased profits. In fact, P&G executives said in their last July earnings call that they expected $800 million in windfall profits because of declining input costs. So corporate profits, they're up. The stock market is up, but we're paying way too much because of corporate greed. Corporate greed. That's what it is. It's greedflation. Now, if Harris wants to take that on, I say fantastic, great, but it has to be effective, okay? And so I cannot wait to hear what details she has to actually bring down prices. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this video, please like, share, subscribe with the bell icon in order to get notified whenever a new video is released. And if you want to support independent, progressive media through this difficult time where it seems like everybody is shutting down, you can become a member on our YouTube page, you can become a subscriber on Facebook, or you can go to my Patreon. It's patreon.com/Jeff Waldorf. Thank you.